I'm Garrett Thompson, 32, and 15 years ago my sister Rachel destroyed my life with lies that got me kicked out at 17. Now I run my own successful software development company while she still thinks I'm struggling. Last Christmas, she invited me to dinner just to humiliate me about being broke in front of our family. What she didn't know was that I'm worth millions, own the building her husband's company rents, and have been secretly paying our parents' medical bills for years. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button to join me on this wild family journey. Growing up in our household was like living in a social experiment gone wrong. My father Frank was a controlling accountant who ran our family like one of his spreadsheets, with every deviation from his expectations marked in red. My mother Diana was sweet but passive, always deferring to my father's judgment even when her eyes showed she disagreed. Then there was my sister Rachel, 3 years older and treated like royalty from the day I was born. She was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I somehow became the family scapegoat before I even understood what the word meant. Even our extended family noticed the disparity in treatment, though no one ever intervened. Rachel got straight A's again. My father would announce at family gatherings, beaming with pride while conveniently forgetting to mention my own honor roll status. This wasn't occasional favoritism, it was our family culture. Rachel learned early that she could manipulate this dynamic to her advantage. When we were kids, if something broke, it was automatically my fault. If money went missing from our mother's purse, all eyes turned to me. Rachel mastered the art of the innocent face, wide eyes brimming with tears as she pointed the finger my way. I remember when I was 8 and Rachel was 11, she accidentally broke our grandmother's antique music box while rummaging through Mom's closet looking for Christmas presents. When the box was discovered, Rachel immediately claimed she'd seen me playing with it earlier. I received a week of grounding and lost my allowance for a month to pay for repairs. I didn't even know the music box existed until I was punished for breaking it. This pattern continued throughout our childhood. Rachel would take the car without permission and blame me for moving it. She would use our father's credit card for online shopping, then suggest I must have stolen the card number. Each time, my protests of innocence fell on deaf ears, and each false accusation reinforced my parents' perception of me as the troublemaker. By high school, I'd learned to keep my head down and focus on academics. If I couldn't earn their approval, at least I could build a future for myself. I maintained a 4.0 GPA despite working part-time at the local grocery store to save for college. My bedroom became my sanctuary, filled with books and computer parts I'd salvaged and repaired. Rachel, meanwhile, coasted through school on charm and our parents' willingness to intervene whenever she struggled. When she barely passed chemistry, our father hired an expensive tutor. When I needed help with a college application fee, I was told to work extra shifts. Things reached a tipping point during my junior year when I was awarded a prestigious scholarship opportunity that would cover a summer program at MIT. It was the first time anyone in our family had received such recognition. For one brief dinner, the spotlight shifted to me. My father actually patted me on the shoulder, and my mother made my favorite dessert. Rachel's face that evening burned with jealousy. I should have recognized the danger signs. Within a week, her plan to sabotage me was already in motion. "You know she can't stand not being the center of attention," my friend Tyler warned me. "Watch your back, man." I should have listened more carefully. Instead, I made the mistake of believing that my academic achievement had finally changed something fundamental in our family dynamic. I was catastrophically wrong. Looking back now, I can see how Rachel's insecurity drove her actions. Any accomplishment of mine threatened the carefully constructed family narrative where she was the star and I was the disappointment. What I didn't understand then was how far she would go to maintain that story. The plan Rachel executed was both simple and devastating. My father kept an emergency cash fund in his home office, about $2,000 locked in his desk drawer. He checked it religiously at the beginning of each month, a habit from his pre-digital banking days. 3 days after my scholarship announcement, the money disappeared. So did $50 from my mother's wallet, and a pair of gold earrings from my parents' bedroom. I was at school when the discovery was made, participating in a programming competition. I returned home to find my father waiting in the living room, his face a dangerous shade of red. "Empty your pockets," he demanded without preamble. Confused but compliant, I turned out my jeans pockets, producing only my wallet, keys, and phone. "Now your backpack." As I unzipped my backpack, a sinking feeling hit my stomach. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Among my textbooks and notebooks was an envelope I'd never seen before. My father snatched it before I could examine it, his hands shaking as he pulled out 10 $20 bills. "This is only part of it," he said, his voice eerily quiet. "Where's the rest?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, genuine confusion giving way to dawning horror. "I've never seen that envelope before." "Stop lying!" he shouted, all pretense of calm evaporating. "Rachel saw you coming out of my office yesterday. And your mother's earrings were found in your desk drawer." The setup was complete. I looked toward the doorway where Rachel stood, her expression a perfect mixture of disappointment and betrayal. The Academy Award-worthy performance included a single tear tracking down her cheek. "I didn't want to believe it, Garrett," she said softly. "But I saw you." "That's impossible," I protested, panic rising in my chest. "I was at coding club after school until 6, then I went straight to Tyler's to study. I haven't been in Dad's office in weeks." My alibi meant nothing. Rachel had already provided witnesses who claimed I'd skipped coding club. The earrings in my desk drawer were damning physical evidence. The money in my backpack sealed my fate. My mother stood silently in the kitchen doorway, doubt flickering across her face but never quite settling into conviction. "Diana, go upstairs," my father ordered, and she complied after a moment's hesitation. What followed was the worst argument of my life. Every accusation from my father built upon years of Rachel's careful groundwork painting me as dishonest and untrustworthy. My denials only enraged him further. When I suggested that Rachel might have framed me, he slapped me hard enough that my ears rang. "Get out of my house," he said finally. "I will not have a thief under my roof." "Dad, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't take anything. I swear." "You have until tomorrow morning," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Take what belongs to you and nothing else. Your scholarship will be withdrawn when I report this theft." The last part was a knife twist designed to destroy not just my present but my future. In my father's world, punishment was never complete until all hope was extinguished. I found my mother alone in their bedroom later that night. "Mom, you have to believe me," I pleaded. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Garrett." Her noncommittal response was worse than accusation. Even with doubt, she wouldn't stand up for me. I called Tyler from my room, explaining everything in a hushed, desperate voice. "Pack your stuff," he said without hesitation. "You can stay with us until we figure something out." I spent that final night in my childhood home packing everything I could into 2 suitcases and my school backpack. Clothes, my laptop, the few books I couldn't bear to leave behind. As I worked, I heard Rachel and my parents talking downstairs, their voices rising and falling like the tide. Around 2 in the morning, when the house was finally silent, I crept down to the kitchen to gather some food. Rachel appeared in the doorway, startling me. "You should thank me," she said, leaning against the refrigerator. "For what?" I whispered harshly. "Destroying my life?" She smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. "For teaching you that actions have consequences. You've been getting too big for your britches lately with that scholarship thing." In that moment, I saw my sister clearly for perhaps the first time. The jealousy, the calculation, the casual cruelty. "I'm never going to forgive you for this," I told her. Rachel shrugged. "You won't matter enough for that to be a problem." I left before dawn, the front door closing behind me with a quiet click that felt like the period at the end of my childhood. I didn't look back as I walked to the corner where Tyler waited in his battered Honda Civic. I was 17, homeless, and utterly alone except for one loyal friend. "We'll figure this out," Tyler promised as we drove away. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Everything I had worked for was gone. My home. My family. My scholarship. My future. But Rachel had made one critical miscalculation. She thought breaking me would be her final victory. Instead, it became the first day of my resurrection. Tyler's family took me in without question, setting up an air mattress in their basement rec room. His parents, both teachers, were horrified by my situation but practical about solutions. "You'll stay here until you graduate," Mrs. Reynolds said firmly. "Focus on keeping your grades up. We'll help you figure out college applications." Their kindness was a lifeline, but pride made me insist on contributing. I took a job at the local grocery store, working evenings and weekends stocking shelves. When that wasn't enough, I added morning shifts at a coffee shop before school. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My perfect GPA slipped to a 3.7, then a 3.5. The MIT scholarship was indeed withdrawn after my father called the program director. My dreams of prestigious universities faded into impossibility as financial reality set in. I tried calling home during those first few weeks. My father hung up immediately. My mother answered once, speaking in hurried whispers. "I can't talk now, Garrett. Your father will be home soon. Mom, I didn't steal anything. You have to know that." The painful pause before her response told me everything. "I just need time to sort this out. Tell her to stop calling," I heard Rachel say in the background. When graduation came, the Reynolds family cheered for me from the audience. No one from my family attended despite the ceremony taking place less than 2 miles from our home. I accepted my diploma with a hollow feeling in my chest, scanning the crowd one last time for a glimpse of my mother. Community college became my path forward. The local technical school offered affordable classes and flexible scheduling that allowed me to keep working. I found a tiny studio apartment with a hot plate and mini fridge that consumed nearly all my grocery store paycheck. Ramen noodles became both breakfast and dinner most days. On rare occasions, my mother would meet me secretly at a diner halfway between our house and my apartment. She would slip me $50, looking guilty as she did so. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," she would say, as if that excused her complicity in my exile. "Has Rachel admitted what she did?" I asked during one such meeting. My mother looked away. "She's doing well at state. Made the dean's list last semester." The subject change was answer enough. In our family mythology, Rachel remained golden and I remained suspect. The real turning point came during my second year of community college. I was taking a database management class taught by William Jenkins, a retired software engineer who recognized something in me that I had almost forgotten existed: potential. "You have a gift for this," he told me after I completed a complex SQL project weeks ahead of schedule. "But you're exhausted all the time. What's going on with you?" Something about his genuine concern broke through the walls I built. I found myself telling him everything, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. Instead of pity, his face showed calculation. "I have a colleague at Tech Solutions downtown. They need junior developers who understand database architecture. The pay is better than grocery stocking, and the experience will be worth more than this class in the long run." That recommendation changed the trajectory of my life. The entry-level coding position paid enough that I could reduce my work hours and focus more on learning. I spent every free moment absorbing programming languages, staying late at the office to use their faster computers, asking questions of senior developers who appreciated my hunger to learn. My tiny apartment remained my home for 3 more years as I banked every spare dollar. While my peers bought new cars or took vacations, I lived as though I were still on the verge of homelessness. The fear of ending up on the street again drove me to save obsessively. During those lean years, I occasionally heard news about Rachel through my mother's guarded updates. She graduated college, got a marketing job at a local firm, married a man named Keith who worked in commercial real estate. Her life followed the expected path of the golden child, smooth and seemingly effortless. I kept my head down and coded. Nights, weekends, holidays. When others saw obsession, I saw survival. The internet became my university, teaching me skills that my community college courses barely touched upon. I built apps on the side, most failing to gain traction but each one teaching me something valuable. By 24, I had enough savings to make a significant change. I quit my job at Tech Solutions and took a risk on developing my own inventory management software, having spotted inefficiencies in systems during my retail days. With no safety net and a rapidly dwindling bank account, I worked 18-hour days in a race against financial ruin. 6 months later, I sold my first system to a regional grocery chain. It wasn't enough to make me rich, but it validated my concept and kept me afloat. I reinvested every penny into improving the product and finding new clients. All the while, the wound of my family's betrayal remained unhealed. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Bennett, using my newly acquired health insurance. Our sessions helped me understand that my family dynamics had never been healthy, that Rachel's behavior stemmed from her own insecurities, and that my parents had failed both of us in different ways. You can acknowledge the pain without letting it define you, Dr. Bennett advised. Your success will be the best response to their lack of faith in you. I took those words to heart, focusing on building not just a business but a life that reflected my values rather than my trauma. I cultivated genuine friendships with people who knew my full story and still chose to stand by me. I learned to trust again, slowly and cautiously. By my 27th birthday, my company had grown to 15 employees. I finally moved from my tiny apartment to a modest house in a nice neighborhood. Though I could afford much more, the habits of frugality were deeply ingrained. The only luxury I allowed myself was a top-of-the-line home office setup where I still worked longer hours than any of my employees. My mother's health began to decline that year. Heart problems, she mentioned casually during one of our infrequent calls. When I pressed for details, she admitted they were struggling with medical bills. My father's insurance covered only a portion of her treatments. Without revealing my financial situation, I arranged to have their medical bills paid anonymously. It was a gesture born of complicated emotions. Lingering love, unresolved anger, and the simple human desire to ease suffering. What my family didn't know, what Rachel could never have imagined when she orchestrated my expulsion, was that being cut off had forced me to become self-reliant in ways that ultimately led to greater success than I might have achieved following the traditional path they'd valued. The scared 17-year-old who walked away from his childhood home had become a man who could solve his own problems, and ironically, some of theirs as well. But the emotional distance remained unbridged, a chasm widened by years of silence and unacknowledged wrongs. Until the Christmas invitation arrived. The call came on a Tuesday evening in mid-December, my mother's number lighting up my phone screen. Our conversations had been increasingly frequent over the past year, but they maintained a careful distance, never venturing into the territory of my expulsion or the years of estrangement that followed. "Garrett," she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of hesitancy that always preceded a difficult request. "I was hoping you might consider joining us for Christmas dinner this year." The invitation knocked the wind from me. 5 years had passed since I'd set foot in my childhood home, 5 years of holidays spent either working or with friends who had become my chosen family. "Why now?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. My mother sighed. "Your father's had some health issues. Heart problems. The doctors say he needs to reduce stress and—" She trailed off. "And seeing his thief son would reduce his stress?" The bitterness surprised even me. "Garrett, please." "He's changed since his diagnosis. More reflective. And I miss you. It would mean so much to have you here." I stared out my office window at the city lights, wondering if this was another setup, another opportunity for humiliation. Will Rachel be there? I already knew the answer. Yes, with Keith and the kids. She paused. She's done well for herself. They both have. The implicit comparison wasn't lost on me. In my mother's mind, Rachel remained the successful one, while my circumstances remained a mystery, my exile having cut off their knowledge of my life. I need to think about it, I said finally. After hanging up, I immediately called Dr. Bennett and scheduled an emergency session for the following day. What do you hope to gain from attending? She asked as I paced her office. I don't know. Closure? Validation? The chance to show them I survived despite their abandonment? Dr. Bennett watched me thoughtfully. Those are all external validations. What would it mean for your own healing? The question stopped me mid-stride. What did I want? The truth was complicated. Part of me wanted to show up successful and secure, to shatter their perception of me as the family failure. Another part craved something more basic, for my father to admit he'd been wrong, for my mother to apologize for not defending me, for Rachel to face consequences for her actions. I think I need to see them as they really are now, I said slowly. Not as the giants or monsters they've become in my memory. She nodded. That's a step toward reclaiming your narrative. But you'll need boundaries. Clear, firm boundaries about what you will and won't discuss, how long you'll stay, and what behaviors you won't tolerate. We spent the rest of the session developing those boundaries. I would attend dinner but arrive shortly before the meal and leave immediately after. I would bring modest gifts but refuse to discuss my financial situation or career details. I would leave if anyone made accusations or brought up the past in accusatory ways. Armed with this plan, I called my mother back and accepted the invitation with my conditions clearly stated. That's fine, dear, she said, relief evident in her voice. Whatever makes you comfortable. The 2 weeks before Christmas passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I selected carefully neutral gifts, a cashmere scarf for my mother, a book on jazz for my father, a set of building blocks for Rachel's children whom I'd never met. For Rachel and Keith, I chose a moderately priced bottle of wine, nothing so expensive as to seem showy but nothing cheap enough to confirm what I suspected were Rachel's assumptions about my finances. The morning of Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. I dressed with deliberate care in clothes that would give nothing away, dark jeans, a blue button-down shirt, and a gray sweater. No designer labels, no visible signs of either poverty or wealth. My therapy-honed awareness of family dynamics had me analyzing even my wardrobe choices for potential messages. As I drove the familiar route to my childhood home, memories flooded back with each landmark. The park where I'd learned to ride a bike. The high school where Rachel had been homecoming queen and I had been the invisible tech club member. The grocery store where I'd worked those exhausting night shifts after being kicked out. I parked in front of the house 30 minutes before the agreed dinner time, then sat in my car gathering courage. The modest 2-story colonial looked smaller than in my memory, the blue paint faded, the front steps showing signs of wear. Time had changed this place just as it had changed me. With a deep breath, I grabbed the gift bags from the passenger seat and walked toward the front door. Before I could ring the bell, it swung open to reveal my mother, thinner than I remembered, her hair now completely gray. "Garrett," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "You came." Behind her stood my father, stooped and smaller than the towering figure of my youth. Beside him, watching with narrowed eyes, was Rachel, as perfectly put together as always, designer clothes and carefully styled hair creating the image of success she had cultivated since childhood. I stepped across the threshold into my past, unsure whether I was walking into a reconciliation or another betrayal. The initial greetings were a masterclass in awkward politeness. My mother hugged me too tightly, her bony frame seeming fragile in my arms. My father offered a stiff handshake and a nod, his eyes constantly darting away from direct contact with mine. "You're looking well," he said formally, as if addressing a distant acquaintance rather than his son. Rachel hung back, her smile not reaching her eyes. "The prodigal returns," she said, the biblical reference carrying a sting beneath its surface pleasantry. "It's good to see you all," I replied, the social script feeling foreign on my tongue. The house interior was largely unchanged, a time capsule of the life I'd left behind. The same beige carpet, The same family photos on the walls, though I noticed my graduation picture was conspicuously absent from the lineup. In my place was an enlarged photo of Rachel's wedding and several portraits of her children. "Come meet Keith and the kids," my mother said, leading me into the living room where a tall man in a holiday sweater was supervising two children playing with new toys. "Keith, this is Garrett," she introduced. "Garrett, this is Rachel's husband Keith and their children, Emma and James." Keith stood to shake my hand, his grip firm and his smile seemingly genuine. "Good to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you." I could only imagine what Rachel had told him. "Likewise," I responded, choosing diplomacy over honesty. The children, aged about 4 and 6, glanced up briefly before returning to their new toys. I placed my gifts under the tree, noticing the elaborate wrapping on the numerous presents already there, many bearing designer labels and expensive ribbons. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, my mother announced. "Frank, why don't you get Garrett a drink?" My father shuffled to the bar cart in the corner, pouring a whiskey without asking my preference. I accepted it with a nod, the familiar routine of him making decisions for me stirring old resentments I thought I'd overcome. "So," Rachel said, settling onto the couch with calculated grace, "what have you been up to all these years? Mom says you don't talk much about your work." The question was innocent enough on the surface, but I recognized the fishing expedition. "I'm in software development," I answered vaguely. "It keeps me busy." "Software development," she repeated with a slight emphasis that implied dubious belief. "Like IT support?" "Something like that," I said, unwilling to elaborate. Keith jumped in, seemingly eager to diffuse the tension. "I'm in commercial real estate. Our firm handles office leasing throughout the metro area. Fascinating industry, always changing." I nodded, grateful for the subject change while noting how quickly Rachel had tried to establish a hierarchy with her first question. "Rachel's doing wonderfully in her marketing career," my mother added. "She just got promoted to senior director at her firm." "Congratulations," I said, raising my glass slightly in acknowledgement. "It came with a substantial raise," Rachel added unnecessarily. "We're thinking of buying a vacation property next year. Perhaps in the Hamptons." And there it was, the first direct attempt to highlight the presumed disparity in our circumstances. I sipped my whiskey and said nothing, Dr. Bennett's advice echoing in my mind. "Don't engage with competitive baiting." The conversation continued in this vein throughout the pre-dinner drinks. Rachel mentioned their new luxury SUV, their country club membership, the private preschool where James had been accepted early. Each comment was delivered with a sidelong glance in my direction, testing for reactions. My father mostly observed in silence, occasionally nodding approval at Rachel's achievements. My mother fluttered between topics, her nervousness manifesting in constant movement and subject changes whenever the tension became too obvious. Keith, interestingly, seemed increasingly uncomfortable with his wife's behavior. When Rachel mentioned their recent first-class trip to Europe, he gently redirected the conversation. "Garrett, do you still play chess? Diana mentioned you were quite good in high school." Before I could answer, Rachel cut in. "Oh, Garrett probably doesn't have time for hobbies. IT support must keep him running all hours." "I manage," I said simply, meeting her gaze directly for the first time. Something in my steady look must have unsettled her, because she quickly turned away. "Dinner's ready," my mother announced with obvious relief. "Everyone to the dining room." The dining room table was set with the good china and silver, a Christmas centerpiece creating a festive atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the undercurrents of tension. My father took his seat at the head of the table, my mother opposite him. Rachel positioned herself at my father's right hand, the golden child's traditional place, with Keith beside her and the children in booster seats next to him. I sat at my mother's right, the physical distance between Rachel and me matching the emotional gulf. As my mother served the holiday roast, Rachel continued her subtle campaign. "We brought the wine, Mom. It's a special vintage our sommelier recommended. Cost a small fortune, but Christmas is special, isn't it?" She looked pointedly at the bottle I'd brought, still unwrapped on the sideboard. Oh, Garrett brought wine too. How thoughtful. We can save that for cooking perhaps. Keith winced visibly at this, shooting me an apologetic look. Garrett, your mother tells me you live downtown now, my father said, making his first real attempt at conversation. Apartment or house? A house, I answered, cutting a piece of roast. Small but comfortable. Renting, I assume? Rachel interjected. Downtown real estate is so expensive these days. Keith would know, of course. Keith's company has offices downtown, right? I asked, deliberately ignoring Rachel's question. Keith nodded. In the Riverside building on Jefferson. We lease the entire 5th floor. Great location. I nodded, hiding my smile behind my wine glass. The Riverside building was one of my first major commercial real estate investments 3 years ago, purchased through a holding company that maintained my privacy. I doubted Keith had any idea his firm's rent checks ultimately came to me. Jefferson is a nice area, I commented neutrally. It's the premium business district, Rachel said. Their lease costs reflect that, believe me. Success has its price tag. The irony was almost painful. As dinner progressed, Rachel's comments became increasingly direct. When my mother mentioned her ongoing medical treatments, Rachel smoothly mentioned how fortunate they were that Keith's company provided top-tier health insurance. Insurance doesn't cover everything, my mother said quietly. We've had some financial challenges with the co-pays, which we've helped with, Rachel added quickly, casting me a triumphant look. Family takes care of family. The implied criticism hung in the air like smoke. I maintained my composure, remembering the thousands of dollars in anonymous payments I had made toward their medical bills. Speaking of family, Keith said, clearly trying again to ease the growing tension. Garrett, do you have anyone special in your life? I date occasionally, I answered. Work keeps me busy. I'm sure it does, Rachel said with mock sympathy. Customer service can be so demanding. My father cleared his throat. How about we move on to dessert and then open some presents? The suggestion of gifts brought a gleam to Rachel's eye that immediately put me on alert. Whatever she had planned, the gift exchange would clearly be her moment to strike. As my mother served apple pie and ice cream, I steeled myself for what was coming. I'm so excited about the gifts this year, Rachel said, her voice carrying that false sweetness I remembered from childhood setups. Especially for Mom and Dad. Keith looked suddenly uncomfortable, focusing intently on helping their younger child with dessert. My father shifted in his seat, not meeting anyone's eyes. The trap was set. I just didn't know yet exactly how it would spring. After dessert, we moved back to the living room for the gift exchange. Rachel appointed herself as the distributor, a role she approached with the ceremonial gravitas of a high priestess. Mom and Dad first, she announced, selecting 2 large, elaborately wrapped packages from under the tree. These are from Keith and me. My mother opened hers to reveal an expensive designer handbag that I recognized from its distinctive pattern as costing well over $1,000. My father received a premium golf club set that had to be at least twice that amount. The salesperson said these are the exact clubs used by professional golfers, Rachel explained, making sure everyone registered the extravagance. The titanium alloy alone makes them worth every penny of the $3,000. My parents made appropriate sounds of appreciation, though my father looked slightly uncomfortable with the ostentatious display. Now open Garrett's gifts, Rachel suggested with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My mother unwrapped the cashmere scarf, running her fingers over the soft material. It's lovely, Garrett. Thank you. My father nodded at the jazz book. Thoughtful. I've been getting back into music lately. The modesty of my gifts compared to Rachel's extravagance was exactly what she had been orchestrating. Her smile widened as she handed her children the building blocks I'd brought them. How nice, she said with exaggerated politeness. Very practical. Not like the electronic tablets we got them, but educational. Keith shot his wife a warning look that she ignored completely. And this is for you and Keith, I said, handing over the bottle of wine. Rachel examined the label with a barely concealed smirk. Well, it's not the vintage we usually enjoy, but I'm sure it will be adequate. Rachel, Keith murmured, a note of warning in his voice. She ignored him, setting the stage for her finale. Now, before we continue with the other gifts, I have a special announcement. All eyes turned to her as she stood, smoothing her designer dress with manicured hands. Keith and I have been discussing Garrett's situation, and we want to help. She turned to me with a smile that dripped with false compassion. We know things have been difficult for you financially. Living downtown in that tiny place, working in basic IT support. I remained silent, watching her performance with clinical detachment, seeing the same patterns from our childhood playing out in adult form. So, she continued, Keith has agreed to create a position for you at his company. Nothing too demanding, of course. An entry-level administrative role with the potential for growth. The salary would be modest to start, but it comes with benefits. The room fell silent. My mother looked mortified, my father studied his hands, and Keith closed his eyes briefly as if pained. And, Rachel added, reaching into her purse, to help you get on your feet, we'd like to give you this. She held out a check. $2,000. Consider it an investment in your future. Maybe you can finally get a reliable car or move to a better apartment. The amount was deliberately chosen, I realized. The exact sum I had been accused of stealing 15 years ago. The symmetry was too perfect to be coincidental. That's very generous, I said calmly, making no move to take the check. But unnecessary. Rachel's smile faltered slightly. Don't let pride get in the way, Garrett. We all know you've struggled since you left home. There's no shame in accepting help from family. Is that what this is? Help? I asked, still maintaining my composure. Or is it something else? What do you mean? She asked, her eyes narrowing. Rachel has always been concerned about your welfare. My father interjected awkwardly. We all have. Have you? I looked at him directly. That's interesting to hear. Rachel pressed on, determined to complete her humiliation ritual. The truth is, Garrett, we're worried about you being a burden on Mom and Dad as they age. They have enough financial concerns with the medical bills without having to worry about you too. And there it was. The breaking point. The accusation of being a burden, the very thing Rachel had successfully labeled me as a teenager. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, setting down my wine glass carefully on a coaster. About several things. The room grew still, all eyes now fixed on me. Rachel stood poised with her cheek still extended, victory gleaming in her eyes. What she didn't know was that the game had changed long ago. And she was playing by outdated rules. The moment stretched between us, Rachel standing with her cheek extended, expectation written across her face. For 15 years, she had cultivated an image of me as the family failure, the cautionary tale. The check was meant to be the coup de grace, cementing my position at the bottom of the family hierarchy. I smiled slightly, the expression catching her off guard. I appreciate the thought, Rachel, but I'm actually doing quite well professionally. My tone remained conversational, matter-of-fact. She scoffed. There's no need to pretend, Garrett. IT support is an honorable job, but we all know it doesn't pay well. Especially with the cost of living downtown. I never said I worked in IT support. You assumed that. Keith shifted uncomfortably. What exactly do you do, Garrett? I own a software development company. We create inventory management systems for retail and supply chain operations. I kept my explanation simple, watching Rachel's face as understanding slowly dawned. A small business venture, she said dismissively, though with less certainty than before. Everyone has side hustles these days. Not exactly small. We completed an acquisition of our main competitor last month. The company valuation is just north of $70 million now. I said this without inflection, as if discussing the weather. The check in Rachel's hand trembled slightly. I don't believe you. That's your prerogative, I replied. But you might be interested to know that my company purchased the Riverside building on Jefferson about 3 years ago. Among other properties. Keith's head snapped up. The Riverside building? Our office building? Yes. Your company has been a reliable tenant. Always pays the rent on time. My father cleared his throat. $70 million? That's hard to believe? I supplied. I understand. It's been a long journey from when I left here with 2 suitcases. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Garrett, why didn't you tell us? Would it have mattered? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its directness. Rachel, recovering quickly, rallied for a counterattack. If this is true, which I doubt, why have you let Mom and Dad struggle with medical bills? Why haven't you helped them? I turned to my parents. Who do you think has been making the anonymous payments to the hospital for the past 3 years? My mother's hand flew to her mouth. That was you? We thought it was an error in the billing system. Or that the hospital had a special program. It wasn't an error, I confirmed quietly. I've been monitoring and covering the expenses since I found out about Mom's heart condition. My father's face had drained of color. The revelation seemed to age him further before my eyes, the implications of what I was saying sinking in. Rachel, sensing her position weakening, tried one last defense. If you're so successful, why the modest gifts? Why the secrecy? It doesn't make sense. Because my success isn't a weapon, Rachel. It's not something I use to make others feel small or inadequate. I met her gaze directly. That's the difference between us. Keith stood up, placing a restraining hand on his wife's arm. I think we should all take a breath here. Rachel shook off his hand. Show us proof. Anyone can make claims. Without a word, I took out my phone, opened my banking app, and passed it to Keith, whose profession made him more likely to recognize legitimate financial documentation. He studied the screen, his eyebrows rising steadily. After a moment, he handed the phone back to me with newfound respect in his eyes. That's substantial. And legitimate. This is absurd. Rachel sputtered, but her conviction was clearly wavering. If you're so wealthy, why drive a normal car? Why dress like that? Because I don't define my worth by brands or price tags. I replied simply. I never have. My father, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. All this time, you've been helping us while we thought. He couldn't finish the sentence. While you thought I was a thief and a failure? I completed for him. Yes. The word thief landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the room. My mother looked down at her hands. My father's shoulders slumped visibly. Rachel, sensing the shift in power dynamics, attempted damage control. That was all a misunderstanding from years ago. Ancient history. Is it? I asked. Because it seems to me that tonight was designed to reinforce that same narrative. To put me in my place. The place you decided I belonged 15 years ago when you planted that money in my backpack and those earrings in my desk. Keith turned to his wife, shock evident on his face. Rachel, what is he talking about? The silence that followed was answer enough. Rachel's face flushed red, then pale. Mom? I turned to my mother. Did Rachel ever admit what she did? My mother's tears spilled over. She told us a few years after you left. Said it was just meant to be a prank, that she never thought your father would actually make you leave. The revelation wasn't surprising, but hearing it confirmed still landed like a physical blow. And neither of you thought to contact me? To apologize? To make it right? We didn't know how to find you. My father said weakly. Mom knew how to find me. She's been meeting me secretly for years. My father turned to my mother, betrayal written across his features. Diana couldn't meet his eyes. I think I should go, I said, rising from my seat. The catharsis of revelation had left me emotionally drained. No, please, my mother pleaded. We need to talk about this. All of us. Rachel stood frozen, the check still clutched in her hand, her carefully constructed world of superiority crumbling around her. "I've said what I came to say," I replied. "I didn't come tonight for reconciliation or forgiveness. I came because Mom asked me to, and despite everything, I still care about her health and well-being." I gathered my coat from the hallway closet, aware of the silent family tableau behind me. As I reached for the front door, my father called out, "Garrett, wait. Please." I paused, hand on the doorknob. "I was wrong," he said, his voice breaking. "About everything. I should have believed you." The words I had waited 15 years to hear landed with surprising emptiness. Too little, too late, as the saying goes. "Yes, you should have," I agreed quietly. "Merry Christmas." As I stepped out into the cold December night, Rachel appeared in the doorway behind me. "You did all this to humiliate me," she accused, her voice shaking. "You set me up." I turned to face her one last time. "No, Rachel. That's what you did to me. The difference is I survived it." Driving home through the silent streets, I felt strangely light, as if a weight I'd carried for years had finally been set down. The revelation hadn't brought the satisfaction I'd imagined in my darker moments of fantasy. Instead, it had simply confirmed what my therapist had been telling me all along: my worth had never been dependent on their recognition of it. My phone began ringing before I even reached my house. First my mother, then my father, then Keith. I let each call go to voicemail, needing space to process the evening's events. As I settled into my home office chair, looking out at the city lights, I reflected on the long journey from that terrified 17-year-old to the man I had become. The path had been harder than it should have been, marked by loneliness and struggle, but it had also been mine to walk on my own terms. The final call of the night came just before midnight. Rachel's name lighting up my screen surprised me enough that I actually answered. "What do you want, Rachel?" Her voice sounded small, stripped of its usual confidence. "I'm sorry. For tonight. For before. For everything." The apology, so long awaited, felt strangely anticlimactic. "Okay," I said simply. "That's it. Just okay? What did you expect, Rachel? That one apology would erase 15 years? That we'd suddenly be close siblings?" Her silence answered for her. "I accept your apology," I said finally. "But forgiveness and trust are separate things. One I can give freely, the other you need to earn. And honestly, I'm not sure it's worth either of our efforts at this point. So that's it. We're just nothing to each other? We're family by birth," I acknowledged. "But family is also a choice, a relationship. And that's something neither of us has chosen for a very long time." After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about choices and consequences, about the ways we build our lives from the materials at hand, whether given to us or earned through struggle. The Christmas confrontation hadn't gone as anyone expected, least of all Rachel. Her attempt to expose me as broke had instead exposed the fractures in our family that had never properly healed. But in that exposure, there was also a kind of freedom. The truth, however painful, had finally been spoken aloud. As I prepared for bed, I found myself wondering what would come next. Would my parents attempt a genuine reconciliation? Would Rachel's apology lead to actual change in her behavior? Did I even want these relationships to be rebuilt? The answers weren't clear, and for once, that uncertainty felt okay. My life was full and meaningful, built through my own efforts and choices. Whatever came next would be approached on my terms, not from a place of that desperate 17-year-old's need for acceptance and belonging. The journey from being kicked out at 17 to this moment of truth had been long and difficult, but standing in my truth before those who had once defined me by their rejection had been its own kind of victory. Not the vengeful triumph I might once have imagined, but something quieter and more profound, the simple power of being seen, finally, for who I truly was. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have revealed your success earlier, or kept it hidden even longer? Have you ever had to face someone who underestimated you, only to prove them wrong in a dramatic way? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this story. Your support means everything as I continue sharing these life experiences. Thank you for being here, and remember that sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's living well on your own terms.